We've discussed many times, there's a concept of midah keneged midah, that whatever we do very often, in the positive and negative, Hashem pays in kind within the similar context. Midah keneged midah, measure for measure. To Mishnah and Sota, we find that since Moshe Rabbeinu took Yosef out of Egypt with the objective to bury him in Eretz Yisrael, so he was involved in dealing with his remains, and Moshe was the greatest Jew at the time. Therefore, who was involved in the burial of Moshe? Hashem himself. That's an example of midah keneged midah. As he was involved and provided a level of honor which was one of a kind, Moshe was afforded that similar honor, one of a kind. And it gives many examples in the Mishnah, midah keneged midah. Over here, the Torah tells us in Lamed Gimel, in Lamed Tes, Yom Parol Yosef, Achre Odia Elokim Osra. After Elokim informed you, as calls us all that you've told me, the years of plenty, the years of famine, and how exactly how to deal with all these issues, to guarantee the country will not be destroyed, be consumed through the famine. Ein novum chochem kamocha. There's no novum, there's no chochem. You're one of a kind. Paro being a statesman, a king of the most advanced civilization, this is assessment of Yosef that in his experience and his life, he was never exposed to such a level of genius. Therefore, ein novum chochem kamocha. And therefore, initially he had said, you should appoint the person who has this capability. So Paro says, you're the one. Now that I understand who you are, because God used you as the conduit to communicate this important message, which ultimately will be world impactful forever till the end of time. Therefore, you're the man. Atoti al Basi, you will oversee my household. Vapicho yishak kolami, and through your mouth, everybody will kiss. Through your mouth, what does that mean? Meaning the mouth is the part of the body which it's multifaceted. We speak, we eat, we breathe, we have intake, we have outtake. Everything's the mouth. And every level of communication regarding the existence of this country, it will come through your mouth. Picha yishak basi. Take a look at Rashi. Yizan, yisparnes. Through your mouth, you will determine who will receive food, who will not receive food, or how the food will be distributed. All the needs of the country, whatever they may be, comes through your dictate. Neshek basi, as we find that Eliezer was called Meshek basi. When Avram was concerned, if he has no physical child, who's going to be his heir? Eliezer oversaw every aspect of his household and his life. Raka kisi agdal mibeko. Only in regard to being the king, the throne, that's the only area where I'll be more advanced than you. Every other aspect of governing this civilization, it's you, not me. I'm willing to give over all that authority to you. Only in regard to the throne, I'll be acknowledged as the king, but outside of that, so basically, maybe he has veto power, or maybe it's just honor-wise, he's the king. But in real time, you're the one who's actually determining how the country functions, how it goes forward. Kisei, Loshen Shem HaMlucha, meaning who's going to be identified as the king? I mean, isn't this obvious? Paro is the king. Do you think he's stepping down from the throne that Yosef should become the king of Egypt? I mean, what does he have to say to Yosef? Raka kise egdol mimeko. Only the throne I will be greater than you. But in regard to anything else, because you determine whether we go forward or we perish, you're the one. What does he have to say that? I will show in a moment. You know, Yosef was such a dimension of person. As he said, you have divine genius. He had a capability. Yosef is able to run rings around Paro where he doesn't even realize that Yosef is advancing. He's taking over the country. Paro will become a forgotten entity. And ultimately, he'll dethrone him. He'll take over the country. He'll become the king of Egypt. And Paro is worried about this in real time. If Yosef would not be Yosef HaTzadik, having the power that Yosef had, he would overthrow the king. And there's a real concern. He's not concerned only because he understands who Yosef is, that Yosef is not that kind of person. That if God used him as the conduit to bring this information, he has that level of purity and truth, he would not do something which is unconscionable. But that's the reason why he had to mention it, because it's something which is on his mind, and he has what to be worried about. But why did he merit Kiel Picha Yishak Basi? Through your mouth, all dictates, all determinating decisions are going to come through your mouth. So Measure Some says something interesting. It's measure for measure. The wife of Potiphar tried to seduce him. So even though he didn't actually commit the act with her, but very often, could be he became intimate, he kissed her, and then afterwards he withdrew. He did not allow his mouth to touch her. As much as she wanted, because it says we had earlier, Rashi says, even if we don't engage in cohabitation, we should at least be intimate with one another. We should have pleasure from one another. He did not kiss her. And because it was such an overwhelming test, and he was able to meet that challenge, as your mouth did not kiss the flesh that was not yours, and that mouth remained holy, uncontaminated, the mouth will dictate what Egypt will be or will not be. That goes into measure for measure. That's the measure. It's mentioned on Tkuma. Over here, the Balaturim writes on Alpicha Yishak Basi. He quotes a pasuk in Mishlei. If you have the Gross Chumash as Balaturim, Alpicha Yishak Kolami. There's a pasuk in Mishlei. Suhasayim Yishak. The lips that deserve to be kissed. Meishud Varm Nechochim. The mouth, those are the lips that express appropriate things, concepts. The mouth that articulates appropriate concepts, that mouth deserves to be kissed, is worthy of kissing. Because only through the lips do you have they're able to articulate those special words. So he says, B'shvil sheheshiv dvarim nichochim, because he was chosen to communicate through his mouth appropriate words and concepts, appropriate solutions. Therefore, since that mouth has that special, Hashem used that mouth, that his divine dictate should come through that mouth. Therefore, your mouth will be the mouth which will determine exactly how Egypt is going to be governed. That's the Mida Keneged Mida, not as the Medrash says. Because he did not succumb to temptation, that he didn't even kiss her. Okay, but it's within the context of what Mida Keneged Mida. But it's an interesting concept. Your mouth is special. Why is your mouth special? Because Hashem chose your mouth as the utensil or as the object through which his words came. The divine ultimate came. Therefore, your mouth is confirmed to be the mouth that whatever comes through your mouth is appropriate and correct. The Chofetz Chaim writes that if a person does not speak Lashon Hara, does not slander, does not speak lies, only speaks truth, that mouth is a vehicle, because when one studies Torah, one has to articulate the words based on a pasuk. Chaimi l'motzeim. The Torah brings life to the person who actually verbalizes, articulates the words of the Torah. And he cites a Zohar that if the mouth is tainted and contaminated and putrefied, anything that comes through that mouth becomes putrefied. And therefore, the words are almost rendered almost of no value, because the Torah itself becomes contaminated. But the mouth that's pure, that speaks only truth, does not speak lashon hara, does not slander. That mouth being pure, the mouth is the perfect vessel or tool for the articulation of truth, which is the Torah itself. And he gives a mashal. He explains it with an allegory. A person has tools, and the tools were always kept in pristine shape. They were cleaned. They were polished. They were sharpened. That tool will produce a perfect product. But if the tool is dull because it was not maintained properly and unclean, the product that tool will produce will be something which is going to be far from perfect, imperfect. The same thing, the mouth. If the mouth is kept in the pristine condition, the Torah comes through that mouth, is articulated and manifests itself as it's meant to be. If the mouth already is damaged, the product that comes out of that mouth is a damaged product. And here we're speaking about contamination. So the same thing. Paro understood, and that mouth God chose to communicate how this country will go forward and not perish. That means that mouth is the mouth that all this wisdom is going to come through that mouth. So I was thinking, the Gemara tells us in Makos, Ernie is an expert in Makos, although he studied a while ago. The Gemara says over there, the path that a person chooses to walk, they will take him on that. Hashem will assist him to walk that path. If you want to do something good, that's the path you want to walk. Hashem will give you all the assistance to be able to go in that direction. If a person, God forbid, wants to choose the wrong path, a sinful path, Hashem will allow you to go there. He's not going to hold you back. Because so I was thinking, so a person who only wants to speak truth, he only wants to speak truth. He studies Torah. He doesn't want to in any way damage that faculty of speech. That means he wants only what kind of words should come through that mouth, only words of truth. As a result of that, when people come and consult with you, that type of person, what type of words, what kind of thoughts would Hashem put in that person's mouth that should be articulated through their mouth? As the person wants only words of truth, something that is absolute truth, which is the Torah itself, those are the only words he wants to come out of the mouth, no other kind of words. Based on the principle, so the type of words that can come out of that mouth are concepts which are appropriate concepts. And the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, which we'll have much later, that the person studies Torah, he merits Toshia, or the last parak in Pirkei Avos, that person they seek out his counsel. The person who studies Torah Lishma. Torah Lishma means that the quality of the Torah comes out of that mouth is the ultimate quality. So what kind of wisdom, advice is going to come out of that mouth? It's going to be Toshia. It's going to be something which is one of a kind of advice to give a person appropriate direction. See how paranoid Paro is regarding Yosef being such a one-of-a-kind of individual that he doesn't want to go into the background to the point where he becomes totally non-functional and eventually he'll be able to just be forgotten. And the people are only going to acknowledge Paro, Yosef, was, so to say, he has the purse strings and he has the power. Like we find later, when they came to purchase grain, Yosef said to the Egyptians, though, you people have to circumcise yourselves. If you're circumcised, then you're qualified to receive grain. You don't circumcise yourselves, you're going to starve to death. So they went to complain to Paro. And they said to Paro, what kind of person did you put into this position? He wants us to do something which is insane, to circumcise ourselves. What does circumcision have to do with us? So Paro says, you brought this upon yourself. You knew the famine was coming. Why did you store away grain during the good years? So they said, Rashi cites this medrash. So they said, we did store away grain, and we should have had enough. But all the grain we stored away rotted because he decreed it should rot. The power says if he has the power to decree that the grain should rot, what would be if he decrees that we should all die? That's Paro's response. Therefore, all you people, if you want grain, you should circumcise yourselves. So what kind of power does Yosef have? To the degree he's doing something which is literally, he's compelling to do something which they don't want to do, but they have no choice. So if a man has that level of power, and later when they thank Yosef for giving them their lives, because initially he said, we've depleted all our money. We can't purchase. He says, what about your livestock? What about your lives? You become the chattels of the government. He said, Yosef, you gave us our lives. We're thankful. Then he says, and of all the harvest, you can take a fifth of the grain and use it to plant, and that you could have as a wage. They were over the top. They couldn't be more appreciative. You gave us our lives. So a man who's such a hero, so to say, where does that leave Paro? And Paro had to worry about this. Because every human being who has that level of power, ultimately, it's contagious. It's addictive. Where does it leave Paro? And Paro says, therefore, Rakakise Egdol Mimeko. But he's not finished. V'yomen Paro Yosef, Reina Satich Osaf Kol Eretz Mitzrayim. He says, I want you to understand that I've appointed you to oversee all of Egypt. There's no area which is not bound to your dictate. V'yosef Paro es tabato me'al yodo. Paro took his ring off his hand. V'itinos al yad Yosef. The giving of the ring that means you're second in command. It's like we find by Achashverosh when he gave the ring to Haman to bring about the decree of Bahashvel Aragalari to annihilate every man, woman, and child, with a whole nation. That was when he gave him that ring. The ring is an indication of total power to make that kind of decision. When he gave this ring, that was actualizing that position of viceroy. V'yalbe shows up big day sheish. And as we said earlier, why did the Saramashkim depict him as a slave? Because the protocols of Egypt says a slave cannot wear garments of linen, because only the ministers who qualified to be ministers, they wore that kind of garment. Revidzov, Vayosim Revidzov al Tzavaru. And he put a gold chain, a gold necklace around his neck, which was an indication of this level of status, of this distinction. Not finished yet. So he wants to make it public knowledge in terms of the way he's going to be perceived, that he is the second to most powerful person in the kingdom. The Arkivos of Mekevs HaMishnah. And he put him into the coach, which was secondary to the king's coach. Ashelo Vikru Lefon of Abrech. And he gave the order that when people come before Yosef, they have to say Avrech. We'll see Rashi, Avrech. What is Av? Avrech. It's a composite. It's a what? It's a Av and Rach. Although he's young, he's like an Av. Or it comes from the word Birkayim. That when they came before Yosef, they didn't walk in before him upright. They had to come in on their knees. When they came before Yosef, they had to be on their knees. That's how they had to submit to Yosef. And this was the dictate of Paro. Take a look at Rashi. Paros tabato, the sidis tabasa melech, he owes lemi shenosenes lo liosheni lo l'gdula. Giving the ring is an indication he's in second in command. He's the viceroy. Big day sheish, davar chashivus mitzrayim. That type of attire was an indication of something of distinction. Revid anak, okay. But Mekevs Mishnah, he gave him the coach, which was secondary to his coach. The Merkavto Melechas Eitzel Shalo. When his coach, the king's coach, traveled, Yosef's coach was right alongside his coach. We find there's an interesting medrash. The medrash says that when we traveled in the desert, he had the Aron, and Moshe took the Atzmos Yosef. He took the remains of Yosef out of Egypt. So it was in a box, in a coffin, or whatever you want to call that vessel that it was in. And when they would travel, the Aron traveled, and the Aron, the coffin that had Yosef's remains, traveled alongside the Aron. Could you imagine? The Aron represents Hashem, and Yosef's Aron travels right alongside of it. Seems to be almost it's disrespectful. How do you equate a mortal with Hashem? What's representation of Hashem? So they asked Moshe, how does one travel next to the other? It says, Kim zeh masha omazeh. Yosef fulfilled exactly what Hashem wanted. And because he lived his life totally committed to the will of Hashem, therefore it's appropriate that his coffin, when they travel, should be alongside the Aron. The Aron and Hashem, that's an indication they're associated with one another. That level of association. The second, the viceroy, his coach, traveled alongside the king's coach to indicate that he's the closest thing to the king. There's that level of relationship between him and the king. Avrech. What's Avrech? Abba Malko. He's the second to the king. Rach v'loshon Arami Melech. Ba'ashutfim. Okay. Dorsh Rav Yehuda Avrech ze Yosef shu Ab b'chochma v'rach b'shanu. Avrech means he's Ab b'chochma. He's like an elder in wisdom, although he's young in years. You know, in Israel they call people studying the call Avrechim, right? Avrechim. America they call colored people, right? Or a younger man in Yiddish. But in Israel, Avrech, because these people, although they're young, they're wise in Chochmah. They're like elders in Chochmah, because what they understand due to their studies, they have a greater understanding of what the average person has. Amalo Rabbi Yossi ben Dumaskis, Ad Mosedo Ma'avi Soledo Saksuvim. He's Rabbi Yossi ben Dumaskis says to Rabbi Yehuda, you're corrupting the language, the psukim. Ein Avrech elo loshim b'chaim. The word Avrech means from knees. It means knees. Shakolo yum nichnosin v'yotzin tach siodo. Meaning everything was, they were subordinated to him. Avrech means there was nothing in Egypt which is not subordinated to the will of Yosef. Shnema nosaliti ito. Okay. Now,
Rabbi.
Wait 1 second. So Paro already says everything in Egypt is due to your dictate. The only thing I have over you, I will be on the throne. I am the king. Now in Mendalet, he's repeating himself. Vayomer Paro Yosef Adi Paro. Again, I am Paro. I mean, he already said he's Paro. Paro means I am the monarch. And without you, nobody is able to lift his hand. What is lift his hand? So the Targum says, carry a weapon. Who's authorized to carry a weapon? Only through your authorization. That if you authorize it, Vesraglo. The only person is permitted to ride a horse is only if you authorize it. Otherwise, people have to walk. That's also, it's an indication of a bill of status only if you authorize that. Otherwise, a person is not even permitted to ride a horse. To carry a weapon or ride a horse. Okay? So again, why is he repeating it? Ani Paro. The answer is clear. He's paranoid. Paro's paranoid, but he's not finished yet. V'yikra Paro Shem Yosef Tzofnas Paneach. He gave him a title. Viceroy's title is Tzofnas Paneach. V'yitin lo es Osnas Pas Potifera Kohen own Lisha. And he actually gave him Osnas, which was the daughter of his previous master, as a wife. V'yetze Yosef, now Yosef's ready to oversee the country. That's what does he have to give him a title? Tzofnas Paneh. What's Tzofnas Paneh? So Rashi says.
One explains what's hidden.
The first Tzfunos thing, the Fanech Dimim Mikro. I mean, he reveals what's hidden. All the sorcerers, the wise men of Egypt couldn't interpret the dreams. He has the ability to interpret the dreams. That's Sofnas Paneah. I mean, what does he have to give him this name for? And who does he give him as a wife? The daughter of his previous master. This is ingenious. Because Paro is concerned that ultimately, because of Yosef's ability, he's going to go into the background and eventually just disappear, and Yosef's going to take over. What does he do? He gives him a title. Sofnas Panech. Nobody should ever forget, how did he arrive at this position? You know why? He interpreted the dream of Pharaoh. He's the one who reveals the hidden. And not only that, you know who his wife is? The wife is the daughter of his previous master. Nobody's ever going to forget that this man was a slave at one time. Meaning he doesn't, by right, he doesn't come to this position, regardless of his capability. This is Paro covering all his bases over here, locking Yosef down in the position that he can't go above a certain level, due to the title, Tzavtis Paneach, and due to his wife, that is children of the grandchildren of his previous master. Or Chaim HaKodesh says, although we don't have prophecy any longer, but when every parent names a child, the name that comes to the parents' minds is the equivalent of prophecy.
Correct.
It's divine. Why? Because since the name identifies the destiny of that child, the name is put into the person's mind by Hashem. God's plan is that these dreams have to come to fruition. So Paro is coming from his vantage point. But why did God put that name, Tzotnes Paneach, in Paro's mind? Why? Could have chosen 1,000 other titles. It's for this reason. That's what the source say. It's no different than a parent naming a child. Because since the destiny lies in the name, and what's the destiny over here? How do things have to evolve and manifest themselves? The dreams have to come from fruition. They can only come to fruition if it's that's what the source say. It's not. That's in the ultimate. Every name is for that reason, right? Why's your name Avram Tzvi? Because in Avram Tzvi lies your destiny. Whatever that is, only Hashem knows what your destiny is.
Okay.
Moshe first came to Egypt. What did he say to Paro? Elokei Yisrael shlachani aleichem. Hashem Elokei Yisrael shlachani aleichem. He said, Yudke Vovke, the God of Israel. So he took out his encyclopedia of deities, and he says, you know something? He's not listed. The one you say you represent is not listed. Yudke Vovke is not listed because that's infinite. And Yisrael represents the spiritual. So he came back and he changed it. Moshe says, Elokehu Ivrim. He went from Yudke Vovke just to Elokei, which means power. And he said, rather than say Yisrael, which represents dominating the spiritual, he said Elokehu Ivrim. Ivrim was our status before Yaakov became Yisrael. Okay? So he's proficient in every type of deity that exists out there. What the ability is, what the limitations are. This supersedes those limitations. This surpasses it. Therefore, all of a sudden, he's buying into Elokim. Have you ever seen anybody who's imbued with Elokim? This is Elokim genius. This is not just deity genius. Okay? Because it's concerned they would deify him, right? That was one of the reasons. Why? Because it says in Chazal, in the Medrash, when Yaakov came to Egypt, the famine ceased to be at that time. So here, it ceased because he gave the bracha to what? To Paro. It was only a famine because there was a lack of rain. When he gave the bracha to Paro, now the Nile starts rising, it comes to an end. The famine comes to an end. So Yaakov is the source of all life. So Yaakov was concerned. They would deify him. That's why he didn't want to be buried in Egypt. That was one of the reasons given.
Right.
But Paro, in his own right, he believed. He became a deity. Why did God, this power give him the ability to be a deity? He had no idea. But he believed he was what? He was the master of the Nile. And the Nile is the source of all life in Egypt. Yosef Yulat Shnei Bonim B'Terem Tov V'Shnasarov. And to Yosef was born two sons before the years of famine came. The Torah is making a point. When did he have his children? When did he engage in procreation before the famine? Asher Yodelo Osnas Bas Potifera Kohenot, who was born to him through Osnas Bas Potifera. Okay? So here, famous Rashi, which is the Gemara in Tainis, B'terem Tov U'Shnasarov, B'kansha Osel L'Odom L'Shamesh B'Toso B'Shasur Ovon. That a person is not permitted to engage in procreation when you have famine years, meaning when the world is suffering, you don't engage in this area, which is procreation. Therefore, the Torah is making a point. When were the sons born to him? B'terem Shnei Arov, before the famine years began. Okay? Because when the world is bitzar, when the world is in the state of suffering at this level, we're not talking about just ordinary suffering, one does not engage in procreation. So I asked the question, which you should all ask, which I asked in the past. Alan.
Noah. Yeah.
I asked Noah.
Right.
All the species in the Teva, in the ark, were not permitted to engage in procreation. Not only Noah and his family, but even the animals did not. Why? So over there it says, because when the world is bitzar, when the world is in a state of suffering at this level, global destruction, it's not the time to do this. So I asked the question, what do we have to learn from Yosef? That when the world is in a state of suffering, one doesn't engage in procreation. What do we learn from the Mabul? There's an earlier source, right? What do we have to learn from Yosef, the way Yosef conducted himself? It's clear, it was the dictate of Hashem. Hashem says the men go in by them separately and the women go in separately, which indicated that they're not permitted. That's the question I asked in the past.